Next up is Claudia Zapata. Claudia, you know what? Can you do me a favor? Can you sit down on that one? Because my camera on over here is like wants to fall over. Because this is a highfalutin conversation. So welcome.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi, doing all right.
Tell me, so Claudia, you are running, you were very close to winning outright
Yes.
in the primary. And this is District 21, Texas District, Congressional District 21. We talked to Ricardo Villarreal earlier, who is your opponent in this primary race. This was a competitive district 2 years ago, and now you also face the challenge that's been gerrymandered to kind of favor the Republicans. But how do you make a dent in this thing as a Democrat?
So the way that I really, came to the decision to run in the first place is this idea of being a public servant.
Okay.
I have been born always wanting to be of service to others. And the different experiences that I've had throughout my life, but then compiled with my work experiences and my education has really driven me to understand that elected office is something that should not be taken lightly.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be those who are ego driven or driven for power, but it should be those that genuinely want to do good for others and see that good government does actually enact good policy and have a positive impact on individuals. And so, taking that, I completely leave out party affiliation. That is how I think we make the biggest impact, because at the end of the day, we are all human beings first and foremost.
Right.
We will share common values. For instance, I come from a class of hardworking Tejanos who, 50% of them voted for Trump.
Yeah.
50% of them voted for Biden.
Right.
However, I love them just the same. They are all extremely supportive of me. And the reason for that is because they know who it is that I am, the values that they raised me with. And so we have to lead with that. Leave party affiliation at the door. It should not be your entire makeup. It should not be your characteristic, your personality. What are the things that are important to you? Because my job as a legislator is to help protect those things and help empower you. And what are the issues that you face in your everyday life? So that way I know how to fix that. That's truly what I care about. And so when I go into this red area that has, a plethora of I guess, disagreeing ideas, I'm always looking for that common ground and reminding each other that we share common values and that we have commonalities. The difference is our approach to policy and our belief in that. So
you come up here to Kerr County, and about 75% of the folks voted for Trump in 2020. It's interesting. There was a guy who was in the comments, talking about stolen election. It's like, well, not really. I go, like, if you look at the numbers, 2 or 3% of the people who voted for Trump in 2016 didn't vote for him in 2020. So there was that people, and he carried Texas. He did very well with Hispanic and Latino voters. Why is that, do you think, that he won that or showed improvement in that area?
So I grew up in South Texas along the border, part of my life, in Mission, Texas. So 956 represent, very proud of it.
Okay.
The fact of the matter is that the Democratic Party has lost hold in rural Texas because they see it as unwinnable. We have also created a very divisive atmosphere by, regardless of where you fall on party affiliation, we fearmonger and demonize the other side every chance that we get, which is immediately extraordinarily polarizing. And so Latinos, especially in rural communities, which South Texas is a rural community. Kerr
Yeah.
County is a rural community, are neglected because Democrats don't come out here because they don't feel like it's worth it.
Right.
And that's the uphill battle that I'm facing in this race, is that I know that this is gerrymandered to hell.
You're right.
You know, however, I'm not going to give up on rural communities just because of where they live.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give up on a group of individuals and a group of communities who so badly need good representation and good policy. And, you know, with that being said, where Democrats have lost, Republicans have gained.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that Trump, regardless of how much I disagree, you know, with a lot of his policies, he knew how to engage in relational organizing and really coming to individuals and saying and pointing out the disenchantment that he faced with establishment politics. And I think a lot of Latinos and especially Hispanic individuals have constantly been taken for granted in this idea that we constantly vote blue and that we're this monolithic group. And
Right.
it's like, no, like we have issues that we care about, you know, outside of the ones that the Democratic Party likes to peg us as
Right.
caring about. So it's time that people start listening. And I'm here to hopefully change
Don't
that.
you think, though, that, I mean, don't you think that Biden's sort of reluctance to come down to the border is a problem for the Democrats? I mean, it just seems like there is a problem down there. I went down to Del Rio last year and spent a day down there, did some reporting from there. I was there the day actually the Haitians were there. And I realized two things. One, you know, the border just isn't secure, and there's a lot of reasons for it, you know. And you can blame it on politicians, but the reality of it is there's a lot of property rights issues along the border. The other part of that too is that those Haitians chose to go to that particular spot. You know, they knew that that was a place they could get safe and be possibly, you know, taken care of. But why? What do you think the reason for this reluctance from the Biden administration to go down and see it for themselves or come up with real solutions?
Well, one, I want to say that discussing the border while I'm running for U.S. Congress in Central Texas, which does not touch along the border, is just playing into Republican fear-mongering and talking points.
Okay.
The fact of the matter is that Chip Roy's inability to discuss issues that are happening in this district, such as, you know, in Kerr County, we have the infant mortality rate is around 8.4%.
Right.
The uninsured is around 24%. Food insecurity amongst children, our kids, there's a little over 2,500 food insecure children that existed here in 2020, and that only increased during the pandemic.
Right.
The fact of the matter is, one, you know, I'll get to answering the question,
Yeah.
but we must talk about the issues that exist within this district, or else nothing is ever going to get done about them.
Right.
And I'm tired of constantly being led to discuss Republican talking points. You know, as someone who grew up along the border, my Theo was also a Border Patrol agent. He had just retired in October after 27 years. As someone who grew up along the border, this idea that the border needs to be this overly militarized zone is something that fundamentally hurts my community and hurts the area where I was raised. We have many international asylum laws and even national asylum laws that we are not respecting, that we are not following. If we follow those, if, for example, especially with Title 42, we must end Title 42. However, I do know that we have to have the caveat of, okay, if we're going to bring an end to Title 42, then we must also ensure that we have safeguards in place, right, to measure, to be able to account for the amount of influx of like administrative duties that are going to come in.
Right.
And a lot of the issue at the border is, one, humanitarian, but two, it's also administrative. The reason that people are finding that it takes years in order to gain citizenship or seek asylum in this country is simply because because immigration is an area that is underfunded. Bureaucracy rings high within our system. We have a lot of administrative procedures that don't necessarily make sense for today, for how today works.
Yeah.
And then, in regards to, safe border, we have hundreds of Ukrainians and Russians who are coming in seeking safety and asylum through the southern border. They were surprised at actually how difficult it has been in order to seek asylum. They didn't realize, oh snap, it's actually not like an invasion, a flood of people can just come on in. And so, we had to work between the American government and the Mexican consulate in order to agree to allow and fast track Ukrainians and Russians who were seeking asylum.
I always look at this from this perspective of both parties kind of stick their head in the sand, on this thing. I feel like that's just my gut, because you talk to folks here and you see it sometimes. We see it pretty regularly, where they will stop people. Unfortunately, they're really bad drivers. These guys that are running, immigrants up through here, because they'll come up and they'll take the 10, and then they always catch them because they either have too many people in the back of the car or they don't drive very well. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I'm always amazed by is, like, we don't seem to want to address the real reason why there's immigration at the border, because it's not necessarily always Mexicans coming across anymore. It's Central Americans who are coming from. They're trying to escape real problems here. Mm-hmm. And then there's like this sort of denial that there actually is a problem. And then there's the other piece of it, like, where you have the language, well, this is an invasion and these people are bad people. And I'm like, well, are all of them bad? Can some of them have jobs here? I mean, how do we solve that? I mean, that's the thing that I feel like we can't have a conversation about that.
Mm-hmm. So one idea, and this is a program that faced a lot of criticism. I mean, and rightly so, because it was not perfect. However, since the end of that program, the Bracero program, we have been able to see the issues that arise, and, kind of the loopholes that we need to fix. So I, for one, would love to bring back a modernized Bracero program in order to fast track work visas for individuals who want to come into our country, work, pay their taxes, and then go back home, and be able to be with their families. I have many relatives who partook in the Bracero program. Mm-hmm. And fun little fact, the Chamber of Commerce is where you used to go in order to get like your work visa. And so instead of saying going to work, you say voy pa la chamba, like to the chamber. So now people say it like, oh, I'm going to work, voy pa la chamba.
Nice.
And so I grew up with that, right? And so I know how greatly that benefited not only, especially our small and mid-sized farmers, but it also benefited the immigration influx that we were dealing with at the time.
Right.
And so, I propose that we just modernize the Bracero program for today.
How come we are not at that point? What do you attribute that to? Because that's like a no-brainer. The Bracero program's a no-brainer. Mm-hmm. And people are like, and I always laugh at this comment, like, oh, well, we get people who will work on those farms. Like, really? You're going to work on those farms? Have you ever seen what that work is like? It's pretty tough.
Yeah, exactly. And so, my family were field workers. Mm-hmm. I mean, my mama tells me stories about how, when she was picking cotton or tomate or squash or citrus, that, they would get pesticides sprayed over them. They weren't allowed bathroom breaks. Mm-hmm. So, as a 6-year-old, she would have to go and squat somewhere, go to the bathroom. So coming from a family of field workers, I know that it's not an easy job. Yeah. And I know that, at the same time, I'm not saying, oh, let's give our worst jobs to immigrants, right? The Bracero program, a modern day Bracero program, would help ensure that these individuals are protected. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I feel like we don't have this conversation is precisely kind of where I started at, is this idea of fear-mongering. Fear-mongering is the greatest rallying cry. It is very, very easy to, one, get campaign finance, right? Get donations, but also, two, get support when you're saying, oh my God, the world is exploding at this moment. If we don't act quickly, this invasion of Haitians is going to come and, hurt us all.
Yeah.
And that is the greatest rallying cry because people feel deeply threatened by that. And so we see that, both sides really don't want to discuss this issue because they both weaponize it as political theater. And I'm over it. I'm absolutely tired of it. I want real work to be done. My family didn't go through everything that they've experienced in their life, and I didn't experience everything that I have, being working class, growing up with a single parent from a family of field workers, to just sit here while people play political theater with our lives.
What made you want to run against Chip Roy?
Public servitude, and really what that means. Chip has been called a principled statesman by a recent Express News article because he consistently votes against veterans, for example. He has voted against reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, voted against providing aid to Ukraine, voted against campaign finance reform, all of these different issues that, in my opinion, are nonpartisan in the sense that we must support these issues, right? We must support our veterans. We must do better.
I made a comment earlier that he voted no against a thing that was in Marfa where it was giving national recognition to a segregated school, making it a national landmark.
Yes, and so he's voted consistently no against everything. And whenever I was making the decision, I explained it to my abuelita, because she lives with my mom. And I explained to her, I was like, Grandma, it's just like this man gets paid over $170,000 a year to sit up there and say no, and actually provide no good, no benefit, not even any pork has come back to TX21.
Right.
And my grandma was like, Oye, mija, ¿es cierto? Like, that's true. And I was like, yes, Grandma. And, I kind of showed her, everything that happened and on all his no votes. And she was just like, listen, if I was paid $174,000 a year to literally go up there, vote no against nothing, and people still think I was doing my job, then shoot, sign me up. And so, that really helped cement this idea to me that public servitude needs to be in the hands of those who are not doing it for ego, who are not holding other issues politically hostage. How do
you, as a Democrat, how do you work with Republicans? I mean, how would you envision that? How do you shape that? Because now you have that, like Roy is part of that group where they don't compromise. There's no compromise anymore. Just vote no.
Yeah, so Chip is part of a little fringe, the House Freedom Caucus. So Marjorie Taylor Greene's in that as well. And that is simply what it is, a fringe. They are consistently a very small group that consistently votes against every single issue that is put forth, even bipartisan measures.
Yeah.
I
think he says no more than Louis Gohmert does now.
I know, right? I have not only the degree. I mean, I have one degree. I don't have like 1,000,000 fancy degrees because I just can't afford to. But I have a degree in political science,
right?
An emphasis in political philosophy. But in addition to that, I have the application and the experience of actually writing policy at the Texas Capitol, in the Texas legislature, being able to sit behind closed doors, working out and negotiating terms of bills. What do we give in on, the strategy behind it? And even more important than that, I was a former worker for the Health and Human Services Commission as a budget and workforce analyst. So I know to look at every single piece of legislation that I am thinking about proposing. One, in terms of budget, how do we appropriate it? What's going to be the handling of those funds? Administratively, is there going to be misuse or mismanagement of those funds? But then in addition to that, what impact does my bill have on the workforce?
Right.
And I think being able to drive home this idea that I understand financial transparency, and I care about the workforce and the impact that this has on everyday working class people is an issue that, or is an area of compromise, or maybe not compromise, but at the very least understanding.
Right. When you come up to, Kerr County, and other counties here, which are obviously, we said deeply red, how do you, when you meet just sort of people in general, how do you address like some of their concerns, or how do you talk to the folks up here?
So, for example, one of the biggest issues that I have heard from folks has come about has been the water and air,
right.
especially when it comes to the amount of rock quarries that we have
right.
consistently going up across the district, and how there's little to no protections for. One, it's so funny because you have different people coming to this table of no more rock quarries, right? Or limiting the amount of rock quarries that we have. And you have all of these people coming to the table, but possibly for different reasons. So you have those that are, very democratic, that are like, well, climate change is real, and rock quarries, the water discharge, the wastewater goes in and ruins Edwards Aquifer and whatnot. But then you have those that are possibly on the other end of the political spectrum that are like, listen, as a farmer, I need the water supply that we have,
right.
or else I am not going to be able to produce. I lose my job. I'm not able to feed my family. That is an issue for me. And at the same time, you have these conflating mix of reasons for being at the table.
Right.
But we all come to the table, which is what I want to stress, and what I'm trying to stress greatly is that, listen, I don't care what the reason for you joining in on discussing this issue and figuring out how we solve it. I don't care how you get here. The important factor is that you are here and we can discuss it. And so, for example, when it comes to like the rock quarries, there are ways that we can sustainably mine that have very minimal impacts on the environment and human life. Water and air quality, well, air quality especially, is one of the least studied issues.
You don't even talk about it in Texas. It's interesting. Yeah.
In the entirety of Texas, rural parts of the nation especially. And so when we think about the fact that we have rock quarries that are going up, that are creating more air particulate, and that we're breathing that in, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're breathing that in. We're also in an area that has little to no hospitals, or no hospitals within a certain county in TX21. Right. And I'm supposed to just be okay with that? Like, I don't think so. So water rights and water issues, and especially land issues as well, has been
one of the things I think is interesting about the rural Texas part is that you have a conversation about healthcare in particular, because it is so. I mean, we're the hub. I mean, and you look at the fatalities that happen out in parts of rural Texas, like Real County, and others, like they exceed the national average in some cases. How do we improve that? I mean, what do we need to do? Is that a federal issue? Is that a state issue?
I mean, it's both.
Yeah.
I mean, healthcare is a public safety issue, and it's all hands on deck.
Right.
That needs to occur. Whenever I hear people discussing rural Texas and healthcare, they only often ever talk about it in terms of rural hospitals,
right.
which is important. We do need to establish more hospitals. However, a hospital is the last place you want to end up at.
Right.
And as taxpayers, it costs us more to cover someone after they've received emergency care at a hospital.
Right.
It is much more worth our taxpayer money to invest in preventative and routine care.
Yeah.
And in order to establish that, we also need to address that, we do have a lack of healthcare workers
right.
within rural parts of the nation.
Right.
An idea that I have that I would love to put forward, if elected, would be to create a program similar to Teach for America, call it Care for America. And we would partner and give funding and grants to VFW posts and American Legions, simply because if there is one thing that I've learned in traveling this entire district, there might be a single thing out there, but there will be a VFW,
There'll be a VFW.
or an an American Legion,
Right.
always.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're, and actually, it's like one of those things too, where you saw things where in some parts of the country, especially like in African American neighborhoods or black neighborhoods, you're seeing like they're doing medical outreach with barbers, you know, because that is a place where men will go to get their hair done, and it's community focused. And barbers are like, they're already, you know, people forget that barbering was actually the first medical sort of treatment, but they can check their blood pressure or just do a little wellness check, see how they're doing. I mean, that's a great service.
Exactly. And so I want to be sure that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We already have these areas, these community centers that are respected and trusted in our communities. All we have to do is empower those community centers to be able to provide the care, right, in a preventative way, instead of always having to react. I don't know. I can tell you I can't tell you how many times I've been to like a plate drive, like a chicken plate drive, like held by the VFW post in order to care for someone's, chemotherapy treatments. And so instead of having these areas and these community centers be reactive, we as the federal government can provide the monies to be preventative, so that way they don't have to raise funds for funeral costs. And so that way we can help assist individuals before it ever gets to that emergency point.
She is Claudia Zapata. She's running for she's in the May 24th runoff election for the Democratic primary coming here. Early voting starts on Monday. She earned 47% of the vote in the primary election, so just missed winning it outright. If whoever wins this goes on and faces Chip Roy in the November general election. Yeah, this is now. Are you sure you want to do this? I mean,
am I sure?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to this.
Am I sure?
Yeah.
Yes. It does not have to be easy. It just has to be possible.
All right. Good deal. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for
joining.
so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.